Vic records all of Bashir's favorite hits for him. McGreevy was a jerk and a know-it-all, but he tied a mean bandage. And Captain Sisko tells Ensign Nog to keep his ears open. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk. Today, we are doing a review of Deep Space Nine, Season 7, Episode 8, The Siege of AR-558, written by Ira Steven Behr and Hans Beimler, directed by Weinrich Colby. This was November 18th, 1998. It is a Nog episode, so Malissa Longo is here.
With Mochi.
We are also thrilled, grateful, and super excited to have writer, producer, showrunner, superstar Ira Steven Behr with us today.
Hello, hello.
Man, this is exciting. So good to see you again, Ira.
Good to see all of you. Good to be back. You know, the seventh season. The seventh season, I started to feel the same kind of flutter in my belly that I had, you know, back in the day with the seventh season of the actual show. Things coming to an end, you know, all good things, nothing is forever. What you leave behind. And then I got into the feeling of, I should have done more of these things. I should have done more of these things. Why did I do more episodes? There were more things I wanted to say. But then I sat down and watched the episode and said to myself, it's probably better that I don't put myself through this all that often. You know, this little trip down memory lane, it's good in small doses.
You actually really articulate the way I feel watching the seventh season, because there's like a certain sadness in the background of my head, like, oh, it's coming to an end. It's coming to an end. I just keep reminding myself of that, and I think it makes me watch the episode slower, and like it's like I try to take my time. It's like when you have some good food and you savor bites instead of just scarfing it all down. You try to take your time and eat each bite and savor the flavor. That's how I feel like now watching these episodes. And thankfully, you're giving us a lot of flavor to savor.
Thanks. Well, I think when we do the final episode, I think even though I don't advise this for the kids listening at home, I think there might need to be some cocktails and stuff that final episode to discuss all that needs to be discussed about that. But that, let's not rush that.
Ira, you kind of mentioned, sorry, I was just going to say, you mentioned your feelings about season 7 and the butterflies. What, I mean, just as a fan, I can only imagine, because when we get to this part, for me, I'm a mess already. I was a mess starting in the 3rd season, knowing that eventually this is going to end. Already I was stressing about it. But for you, when you guys were back there in 98 and 99, what was the prevalent feeling? Was it excitement, nervousness, sadness? What was relief?
Well, and I hate to say it, I think you're going to, you know the answer, because it's been used as the answer for so many other questions. I'm sure it's like 26 episodes. You don't have time to think of anything except for the 26 episodes you have to get done. So there was no real time for nostalgia. There was no time for let's sit back and really take in what's happening. Also at that point, I was the only person there who had been, you know, in the writing staff who'd been there for all 7 seasons. So,
all right.
So there was a kind of different vibe that I was going through, I think, if I had allowed myself to go through it. I'm not saying that 5 years isn't a long time to be on a TV show, but to have been there from the very beginning, casting that whole thing, you know, luckily I had the Dominion War to keep myself occupied. And how many, you know, I was thinking, well, how many episodes, you know, we were going to get out of this horse trading with Rick about how much serialization we could do, and, you know, things like that, that kept me from thinking about the bigger picture, you know. So it was just another season, really. There were things, episodes we wanted to do because we knew we didn't have another season to do them in. but there was no sense of this is the end. It's like, it's just another 26 episodes we have to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to my question, which is how much of this season is tying up storylines that you want to tie up and get basically ending, and how much of it is like, oh, well, we're creating new storylines? Because I feel like there's kind of a balance there with the whole introduction of Ezri, and even with this episode, I feel like it's almost a tie-up of the Nog-Quark relationship, where it feels like this is almost like Quark is seeing Nog now, having resisted his whole participation, and this is kind of the tie-off of all of that, the climax of it. But how much of it is the balance there?
Well, that's a really good question. I think Ezri, really made us present in the new. So it wasn't all about nostalgia and just we have to tie things up. Ezri was like, we had to validate Ezri, whether the fans, again, I've had this discussion with you guys before, it's not so much with the fans, but with ourselves. We had to feel that we were, at ease and confident with the decision to bring on another Trill. And so a lot of the season, especially the first half of the season, it's a really good question, because it really divides the season up. I never thought about this. But the first half of the season a lot of it was about Ezri and just making, not that there weren't other great storylines and things we were doing and giving characters good stuff to do, but definitely Ezri was, we have a limited amount of time, let's get this character to pop. And then the second half of the season was, let's make this whole Dominion storyline that's been going on since season 2. Let's really, finish that in a big way, try to say things about the franchise that hasn't quite been said before, at least in the same way, of which this episode we're going to talk about is a big part of that. And then tie things up, but at the same time, knowing that there was not going to be a movie, that this was the end. We didn't want to tie it up in a neat bow. We didn't want to make it like the audience knew what was going to be the future for every one of these characters. Right. So everyone was going off and doing their own thing. So there was a lot going on. I forgot about how much the first half of the season was consumed. And I know fans at the time were like, is it too much Ezri, blah, 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 blah. But who cares? We just, they made us, we found ourselves in this situation where we lost Terry Farrell, which was like, okay, why the hell did that have to happen? But okay, it's done. And now what do we do about it? What do we do about it? And so it's funny, Cirroc, that you bring it up, because when I watched this episode, one of the things I liked about the episode was, without hitting it too hard, I thought that Ezri and her relationship with Kellen, with Bill Mumy, even though there's not a lot of screen time, I thought it was well handled. And at that point in the season, we could have Ezri just there doing her thing. We didn't have to focus on it as much. It certainly wasn't an Ezri show in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, interesting.
And I think that in some way, because as I'm watching the first up until now, these episodes, Ezri feels like the reintroduction to the characters. So it's like when she pops in, she's at Sisko's kitchen. She's, boom. She's not even on the station first. She's like in the Sisko's personal space, right? And so like, you're like, okay, what is this girl doing here? And she endears herself. Then we get the awkwardness with her and Worf kind of later on, where Worf is like, hey, stay away from me. I don't know how to deal with this. And I really feel like I'm getting a reintroduction to the characters. You get Quark kind of revealing, hey, just be yourself, and you don't have to hold on to a lot of those things in the past. There's a lot of reintroduction of the old characters through the new character, which I think you guys did a very good job of kind of blending that in together as well.
You know, I have to say something else now, you know, and consider this a season 7 kind of discussion. Just listening to you talk, Cirroc, and I've told you how impressed I was when I interviewed you for the documentary and stuff, but I see such a difference just in these last few minutes talking to you as when this show, The Seventh Rule, began. Because when it began, I was thinking, boy, Cirroc is like, he's really learning this as he's going. The show, I mean, you were a kid, right? And you weren't in a lot of episodes and a lot of scenes, and you weren't watching the show like a fan. Why would you? So you are discovering this show. And I remember thinking at the beginning, it's like, you know, Cirroc needs to do some homework, man. Cirroc's got to catch up to this thing. But what that homework was, clearly now it's coming to me, was watching the goddamn show and doing the show. And now I'm hearing you talk, and this is the Cirroc I know. You know, the guy, the intelligent man who can now articulate his place, his feelings about Deep Space Nine. You know, you've learned the show. So congratulations. You know, no, I mean it. It's like totally. It's an interesting thing to watch. It's another growth thing. And I know you're not a kid. I know, you know, I don't mean growth in that sense, but it's definitely you coming to an understanding of an important part of your life that you were too young to understand at the time. And it's nice. Yeah,
and I've grown so comfortable and familiar with these characters because they're so well fleshed out. And I know the people personally, so it makes it easier to get to know the characters. And as I've seen what you guys have written, these episodes are so poignant because they're just dealing with subject matter that relates to all of us. Just doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. At some point, you care about your nephew or your son. I think you had a great line in this episode where Quark tells Sisko, "You wouldn't send Jake," and it was just like a real like zinger. Like it hurt me. I was like, "Whoa, yeah." Would I send my kid? I don't know. It was kind of a big deal the way he said it, and I love the familiarity with the characters that Quark felt close enough to even say that to him. You know, like. I think it's just so personal for me. And as I'm watching these episodes, I really love the way these friendships and the dynamics of you always go the other way when I expect you to go one way. For example, when you had the bandage scene, I expected you to write something like, "Yeah, that was my buddy. I love the guy. He was an awesome man." You went the exact opposite way. I hated that guy. He couldn't stop talking.
It's more real.
You did that. Yes.
Yeah, we can talk about that scene because when we get to actually talking about the episode. But I just want to say one last thing, and then we could let this slide. But of course, the show is so much. The series is so much about, like you said, relationships and friendship.
Yeah.
You know, Cirroc, I wouldn't say you owe him, but I really hope you appreciate what Ryan has done for you by
absolutely.
You know, Ryan. Excuse me for talking for you, Ryan, and if I'm wrong, just say. I mean, Ryan is.
I won't tell you if you're wrong, regardless.
Ryan is a fan of the show, right? Yeah. Ryan is a fan, and he's doing this out of his love of his show, but. What this has offered you, giving you a chance. I mean, you owe this guy and Malissa, and obviously Aron. If he was, this would be a whole different discussion if Aron was here, I'm sure. So this is something you should never forget as you go up to other things, or you're doing season 7 of Strange New Worlds, and this is all in the distant past. But this is something you should never forget, and this should be something between you guys that's very special, you know.
I love Ryan dearly. I love Aron dearly for, just coming up with this concept and having the vision and the foresight to see this day. He knew that there would be value in watching this kind of maturation of the understanding of the show. And Malissa has been so awesome. And Ryan, you've been amazing. And I guess I don't thank you publicly enough, but you make this possible. You're the Ira Behr of this podcast. So
well,
I think you are, and I thank you.
I'll be the David Livingston.
You're the man, and I thank you all for allowing me to have this journey, learn about the show, because I'm really. I felt like I didn't know anything about these. Now, in hindsight, I didn't really know much about the show. I knew about the people on the show and my personal relationships with the people, and certainly the episodes that I did and what I did in those episodes. But really, what everybody else was doing on the show, to know their plot lines and their storylines, and to get to see their performances. And their growth as well. I'm not the only one that grew. I think Terry Farrell grew on the show, and Sadiq grew on the show. Aron grew on the show.
Totally.
Renee didn't grow much because he was already there. He already was a master of his trade. But a lot of us grew by being around such experts like Avery Brooks and Renee and you, Ira. So. It's been a really amazing journey, but that's part of the sadness now as I'm watching these episodes, because I'm thinking, man, I want some more of this DS9 stuff.
Now you get it, man. He's one of us now. Ira, I just wanted to echo what you were saying. And by the way, thank you so much for the kind words. Malissa and Cirroc and I are on like this crazy journey, and it feels so important and powerful and good. And like I said, by the third season, I was already sad knowing that at some point it's going to be over. But we've watched Cirroc first coming on as the actor, looking back on the show, and Jake Sisko and Cirroc, the actor, looking back. And now by the seventh season, not only then by like the third or fourth season, he also became Cirroc Lofton, the Deep Space Nine fan. Like he's like, I'm actually a fan of Nana, the actress. He became a fan. But now he's turning into Cirroc Lofton, the Deep Space Nine expert. Like he's noticing these things and finding these things and remembering these things that I don't remember. And I've seen it a bunch of times. I'm like, holy shit, how did he catch that? So like he's become like the Deep Space Nine expert. And it's so cool to watch. And Malissa and I just like watch him every single week, and becoming this expert, I guess. But anyway, it's been an amazing growth and a wild ride. And yeah, Cirroc and I do absolutely exchange our fondness for each other, maybe more so privately than publicly, but there's nobody in the quadrant I'd rather be working with than Cirroc. He's like A+ aces through and through. Anyway, we'll kiss each other's butts a little bit more later. But Malissa, I know you have a lot to say as well, because you're wearing one of the best shirts of all time, the Captain Nog Forever shirt. And Nog had such a great and prominent and important role in this episode.
Well, first I want to say that going into this show, Aron knew how great the show was, but he hadn't watched it. He hadn't sat down and watched it. He probably watched it more than Cirroc had. But he knew that there was good stuff in this show, and he really was excited to explore it. And what he was even more excited about was to see Cirroc's reaction to seeing the show for the first time. And it would have been amazing to see Aron watching Cirroc's growth through these 7 seasons, because I know I've seen it. And from the first episode to where we are now, and going back to listening to the earlier episodes, it's your growth has been wonderful to watch, and I'm grateful that I've been able to see it. Because your insights on things and the things that you catch aren't always what everybody else would catch or bring to the table. And it's wonderful to see that. So, and yeah, Aron would be excited to be a part of this right now, but so yeah.
Well, let's get into this episode because Ira, you and Hans really just hit this out of the park. I feel like many great moments, but the centerpiece of which is this experience about Nog. I think we really get inside Nog's head in this episode. He says, he wants to earn his respect, and I feel like that's been his overarching mantra for his character. At some point when it triggered, he was like, I need to earn my respect. And he really reveals that in the scene with Quark in this episode. Where does that originate for you guys story-wise, like for his character and the journey he's going to take in this episode?
Well, as I felt since season 2, the end of season 2, I always felt a certain feeling of not so much guilt, but an unease with the way violence was portrayed in Star Trek and these space battles. Even back in the day when they had, I forget what it was called, before they had, tweets and chat, where people, the message boards, right?
Message boards, yeah.
It used to just drive me insane how much it was fanboys just riffing on spaceships blowing up and battles and stuff like that. And all I kept thinking was the amount of people on those ships who were being killed. And no one cared. No one ever thought about that, it seems. And part of the reason to do the Dominion War originally was to just, as with everything on DS9 that I wanted to do, was just to question the Federation, not put it down, not necessarily rip it a new a-hole, but just go, what does it all mean? How do they react to threats and violence? A lot of the stuff that Quark talks about in this episode. So we try to do it a little bit with To the Death, which kind of worked okay, but it didn't hit home enough. And so this was the chance, this was the episode where I really wanted to make the audience uncomfortable, or at least open their minds to what they've been watching as entertainment and make them maybe think about it and how they feel about it. So obviously Nog has a big role in this. I mean, so do a lot of other things in this episode, a lot of other elements. But it seemed like right off the bat, I wanted Nog to be a victim of this battle, this fight, this hand-to-hand combat, this not killing people from afar, but having to deal with combat and violence face to face, and the toll it takes on people. I mean, to me, the most chilling moment, and I meant it at the time, but I was amazed, having not seen it all these years, when Nog says, "I feel sorry for the Jem'Hadar," after Quark makes this great speech and does all he can to explain to his nephew, not to get caught up, not to become another, another person of violence as the answer to things. I mean, that line, I feel sorry for the Jemadar. I mean, Nog is lost in that moment in a way, you know. Who knows where that would have gone if he hadn't gotten injured. So, I mean, Nog was just the perfect way to experience what this show was about, or at least as the core of it. So I think that worked extremely well. I was very happy with that. And, you know, to me, when I think about this episode, what I think about the most is one of the battles I had with Rick that I lost, which was, you know, we want to blow up. We want
Berman or Colby? I mean, in this episode, I'm not, you know, I don't know for sure.
I wanted to blow off both of Nog's legs.
Right.
Because we knew that he was going to get his leg back, right? I mean, it's the 24th century. There was never an issue that we weren't going to have a hobbling, one-legged Nog. You know, we were not going to have, that wasn't part of the equation. We all knew that. So what was the thing that would make the audience most uncomfortable within the moment? What would be the thing that they would most, you know, cringe? What's the most cringe-worthy thing we could give him? And the thought of losing seemingly half your body, you know, seemed really disturbing and really scary. And it made Rick uncomfortable, and and it was like, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. Yes, it's not fun, and it's icky. It's this and it's that. I could not move him off that dime, you know, and it's still, you know, I just think it could have even been more powerful. I know you can say, well, one leg, two leg doesn't matter. And maybe on a certain level it doesn't, but I think it would have, for a Star Trek episode in 1998, that would have been like really like, what the hell are we watching? And that's what I wanted. But you know, and that's when we knew we were going to do another episode. I mean, that, you know, we were going to do It's Only a Paper Moon, because this could not be like O'Brien, who gets 30 years of whatever in prison, and then we never talk about it again, which is our bad. No, we couldn't just let this go. This had to be serious. We had to see the response, and who better than Nog, you know? And the fact is he doesn't leave Starfleet, does he? He doesn't become, you know, a pure Ferengi. He's lost to the Ferengi. In that moment, he says, "I feel sorry for the Jemadar." I really feel he's lost to the Ferengi, for good or ill.
I wrote down that Nog loses his rose-colored glasses when he's looking towards, you know, this war between the Dominion. I feel like up to this point, he has kind of romanticized the soldiers that he looks up to. And then the realization of this isn't a game. And, you know, and I feel like there's a lot of growing up for people who may not have had as much combat experience as some of the other characters on the show. And I was wondering, was that a conscious choice, or did it just happen to go that direction, the story?
I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Well, like Nog doesn't have as much experience as, say, Kira in a battlefield, or Quark doesn't have battle experience, or Ezri, or even Bashir.
Well, that's why we put them in. That's why we didn't have O'Brien and Worf in the show. We didn't want to have the combat vets. We wanted Sisko, without a doubt. But we wanted those people who had a more visceral reaction, who haven't been hardened as much. And also because you have guys like Vargas and Reese, and those people who are so, in the moment and in survival mode, that we needed to see the difference. So Nog was just at the top of the pyramid, where Bashir and Esri were the other sides of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid. But yes, they're all going through what is, even though, yes, Bashir has been in battle before, and the other Trill symbionts have been in battle before, but Esri, it was, trying to give the audience enough surrogates so they could put themselves in their place.
So, sorry, we just got to run to our break real quick.
Okay, yeah, I
very quickly.
Yeah.
But really good point, Malissa. I thought about the rose-colored glasses. I also submit that Quark lost his rose-colored glasses as well. He was forced to because of that situation in a lot of ways. But let's take a super quick break. Ira disagrees with me. He tilted his head. He's like, did he? I don't know.
I don't know.
As his view of Nog, maybe.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll take a super quick break, and we'll be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc, Lofton.
Hello.
And Ira Stephen Behr, of course. Malissa and I are hanging out and having fun with these two superstars. Here are the trivioids of the week. Vic records all of Bashir's favorite hits for him. Grand Negus Zek, Nam for Zek, by the way, non-appearance mentioned, and one for Jake as well. Grand Negus Zek picked Quark for a fact-finding mission on the front lines. Quark wants the bridge officers of the Defiant to join him for a Ractigino in the mess hall. Captain Loomis and Commander Parker were killed 10 days ago. McGreevy was a jerk and a know-it-all, but he tied a mean bandage. Nog can hear Vargas's stomach grumbling, and Esri tuning a phase amplifier with a coil spanner in the communications bunker. Whoever had to memorize that line, that's tough. Captain Sisko tells Ensign Nog to keep his ears open, and Quark's ears save his life and Nog's. All right. Anyway, you were saying, Cirroc.
Yeah, there was a moment there when Sisko goes to visit Nog after the injury, after he loses his leg. And I thought you wrote a really great moment for Nog where Nog says, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
And he says that to kind of ease Sisko's anxieties. And I thought that was kind of a really big moment for him, that here he is the victim, here he is going through all of this. All the stuff's in his head, but he's still thinking about how Sisko is thinking, how he's feeling about it. I thought that was like excellent writing.
Yeah, I thought that was a good moment as well when I watched it again, and just having him say, you think it would, but it doesn't.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
That really made me, the need for the kid to
cheer him up. I'm trying to cheer him up. Like,
put on a brave face.
Yeah.
I lost it.
That was fantastic. I was just. Like,
I lost it at that moment. I was like,
I mean, and Sisko has a hard scene with Quark where he's like, "Hey, listen to me. I'm only going to say this once. I care about every one of my, every one of my people." Every single one. And then I thought he kind of straightened Quark out a little bit, but he had to be hard in that moment because you can't be thinking about people's feelings and certain individuals when you're trying to manage the whole situation. But love these kinds of moments here. Vargas, very well casted. I thought he did a fantastic job. I felt all of his anxiety in this episode. I felt all of his
first line. I thought of you, Cirroc. At the first line when he comes in all intense, I'm like, "Ooh, Cirroc's gonna love this guy."
I love it. He's like, "Take it easy, take it easy." What the fucking take it easy? What do you mean?
I thought he was fantastic. I loved him when we cast him. I knew the actor. I hadn't realized how he's gone off and done hundreds of hours of TV shows, The Good Wife and Major Crimes. I mean, he's been, hundreds of episodes. But, when I was watching the show, and I'm trying not to do this because I've done it in other times we've talked. So I'm trying to not do the usual, I wish we had done this instead, or, I can't help but watch it and think I want to fix. I know no one gives a crap about that. So I'm trying to avoid that. The one thing I'll say is when we got down to the planet, I almost turned it off because it was like, oh shit, here we are back in the caves and it's so unreal. And why couldn't we go out and do this on location and blah, blah. But I have to say, maybe it was just the way my TV is calibrated, but the fact that it was so dark and so chaotic at times, it really worked. I liked, I came to live, I accepted the fact that we are on stage, whatever that was, 16 or 15 or whatever the number that we had the cave set. But as soon as we did the scene with the bandage, as soon as Raymond Cruz had his moment, I thought to myself, okay, I remember why I did this episode and why I wanted to do this episode and what this episode is gonna carry with it. And I just thought he was off the charts good. And again, not the kind of character you're used to seeing in a Star Trek. You're not used to seeing people who can't hold it together in the moment. People tend to be a little more blasé in Trek when it comes to hard times or having to cope with stuff. But this is a guy who's been on the line way too goddamn long. And
5 months, I've been stuck for 5 months. His frustration was palpable. And when he grabs Bashir and basically says, "Get your hands off that bandage," I'm like, you don't mess with this guy. He's not playing.
I finally figured out what I recognized him from: Breaking Bad. He was Hugo Salamanca as well. You're right. Long list. This guy commits.
Yeah. Well, and he's been in the X-Files too.
Well, then there you
go. He's terrific.
El Chupacabra.
Oh, nice.
Terrific.
I felt like this particular speech that Quark gave when he was talking with Nog reminded me of a book or something. I couldn't put my finger on it, and maybe you can help me out, Ira. It was one of the greatest speeches in this show and in the series in general. There's just so many of them, but I know when the dialogue is good when I write it down myself. So I'm literally pausing and writing down dialogue. I used to do that when I was listening to my favorite rap songs as a kid. I'd listen to the Biggie songs and write lyrics down. But that's because it was so good. When something moves you to that level, you want to write it down. And I feel like Ira, throughout the 7 seasons, I've been writing your stuff down like crazy. That's just testament to you and all the great writers that you had on the crew with you. But this is the line I loved. He says, "Yes, humans, they're wonderful, friendly people as long as their bellies are full and their hollow suites are working. But take away their creature comforts, deprive them of food, sleep, sonic showers, and then you go on to say, put their lives in jeopardy over an extended period of time, and those same friendly, intelligent, wonderful people will become as nasty and violent as the most bloodthirsty Klingons." And I was like, wow, that's like it's a real truism. And totally, I don't know where I've heard this sentiment before, and you can help me out with it a little bit.
I can't give you an actual quote because it's a concept that obviously has been around. And I'm sure that the pithier way of saying it, that someone has said it in a line rather than in lines. But again, it all goes back to being a saint in paradise, It all stems from that, at least for me. What the rest of the seasons of the show were about was really trying to just follow that concept and see where it leads. I mean, we're looking at a time in our lives right now, where, you know, if the grid doesn't hold, you know, if the power starts going out, like, you know, rolling blackouts and you know, global warming and this heat and water, it's not going to get
food supplies. Yeah, it's not going to be pretty when people can eat.
It's going to be, you know, and people walking around with AK-47s, you know. I mean, so I think Quark knows what he says. I think he knows what he's thinking about. Let's put it like that.
People get ugly.
And I think I personally feel like it was so important to have Quark challenge Sisko in this episode to maybe open his eyes to the reality of, you know, they're not just names on the list. You know, this is your kid's best friend that is here on the front lines with you, fighting this war in the trenches. And you know, Vargas is somebody else's best friend, and the captain who dies with Nog is somebody else's best friend. There's somebody who cares about them. And I think Quark was so instrumental in making sure that Sisko was aware of that. Maybe he was, but Quark really needed to drive that home. And to me, it feels like he did that so well. And this whole episode was a wonderful marriage of so many different talents as far as casting and writing and music. That the I'll Be Seeing You, was that part of the script originally, or?
Yeah, it was.
It's so good. It just, it's such a wonderful.
Well, you know, it was that sense of keeping it as close to something relatable and not some science fiction battle. So the idea that, you know, when you think of all the USO shows during World War II and all the how much music meant and the pinups, anything that reminded the soldiers of home, you know, and those were people who were overseas for quite extended periods of time. That war lasted a long time, you know. So just the idea of having, you know, and using Vic, that's why I like the you know, I wanted to give the audience the opening scene to make them throw up their heads. Oh shit! This is Rom is singing.
Rom is singing.
Nobody wants to see that. No one wants to be in the Hollow Suite. What are they doing? We want to see.
Where is this going? That's what I was like. Where the hell is this going? I hope this is not this kind of episode.
No, I have to say, Rom's line, "Forget it, he's not hiring," actually made me. Yeah. Because that was such a diluted, he was so in the moment and lost, and he was so disappointed. I actually laughed out loud. I forgot that line. And that line worked for me. It's so dumb. It's so like Bashir would be, but he's not thinking about that, thinking about his own disappointment. It was anyway, to start with that and then to have Vic sing that song, and now it's not so funny, and it's not like what the hell are we doing in the Hollow Suite. It's like these people are a lot of these people are going to be dead in 15 minutes, you know, in terms of screen time anyway. And there was a haunting quality about it. And, you know, I just knew that was one of the songs that Jimmy could knock out of the park. And I thought that was a very effective moment that, again, didn't seem very Star Trek-y. You don't get a chance to use music, contemporary music, obviously, in that way in most of the shows, obviously.
Yeah, it actually really affected me too. And I was kind of surprised by that because I remember the scene, I remember everything, but I was kind of surprised that when it started playing and you see the kind of the clash of the sound and the imagery, but then also the meaning behind it. And you also you did your work ahead of time, with the talking about Bashir getting those, things and all that. It really paid off. It felt so much more emotional, like the culmination of that episode. It was really beautifully done. And you said you had that song in mind from the very beginning, or did you just know it's going to be a Jimmy song? We'll figure out which one later, or did you pinpoint that from the get-go?
I had that one pretty, if I'm remembering correctly, that was, that's it was about longing, it was about longing and hopeful and the fact that they're not, a lot of them are not, you won't be seeing me. I won't be seeing you. It all is going to end here. It had, I think, something that's very hard to achieve anytime, when you're doing a TV show, but especially something like this, is to a poignancy that is not just sentimental or cheap, but it's like, you can put yourself in these people's shoes, boots, whatever, and it was a sanctified moment.
Ira, the new Star Trek shows, a lot of them are going over and beyond out of their way to make callbacks to the Star Trek that came before them. So they're making nods, they reference names, and there's a lot of homage being paid to previous Star Trek in the new iterations of the shows now. I caught a nugget in this episode, and it's very rare that I see it on DS9 where you pay homage. But in this one, when he says, "I'm an engineer, not a magician."
Yeah, we caught that. Real quick,
it's got to be a throwback. That's got to be a callback.
Ira, I don't know if you saw the Lower Decks trailer, but look at what Rutherford is wearing.
So awesome.
And he also seems to be wearing a Zephram Cochrane hat here, but that's definitely and our buddy Don Crandall made
those are the kind of callbacks. Yeah. But you definitely make a callback in that line. I feel that's got to be a Scotty reference, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I mean, obviously that wasn't hidden. that wasn't hidden in any way. The thing about Bill, and one of the things that made that episode kind of stand out for me was getting a chance to work with my neighbor and friend Bill Mooney. And the fact that, he was his own little bit of sci-fi icon through, Lost in Space. And he was doing, I think,
Babylon 5.
Babylon 5 at that point.
Yes.
And we had talked about him being on the show. We didn't want to play an alien, which I understand, and blah, 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 blah. But the thing is that one of the things that I felt gratified watching the episode again is I felt that the Ezri Khaled scenes worked really well. And I thought that without hitting it over the head, that was also a death that meant something. I wanted the deaths as and the guy who lives is Reese, the psychotic,
right,
who survives.
He's gonna live forever.
He's going to live forever. but I just, Bill has always had the ability to play intelligence on screen, which is kind of funny because hanging out with him, I don't think he's that smart, but but no, he has a real ability, without having to overdo it to he has that kind of scientific mindset that he can play, and I just thought it was a cool character who belonged on Star Trek, who you would think would survive and then would have a nice little farewell, the relationship that didn't get a chance to go anywhere because the war is going to he's going to go off and fight the enemy there, and she's going back to Deep Space Nine. That's what you'd pretty much expect, and instead that character, did not make it either. So I thought that worked kind of nicely, that whole little storyline.
Yeah, that beautiful scene, that whole 9 Lives scene where she said, I wasn't here, but I just love that scene. I was like, wow, this is a great scene. And for that, that's kind of like the B story. I don't know if you'd call it that. Kind of like it's part of the main story, but it felt like it was a small little B story about Esri and Kellen's conversations and the whole them learning each other. I just loved it, and I thought it worked very well. All of the smaller interactions between the characters, whether it was Quark and Nog scene or Quark and Sisko. Even Kira and Sisko had a really good moment at the very end. It was small, but it worked for me very well.
Yeah, what I thought worked without ever having to talk about it really or comment on it was the show starts and ends pretty much with Sisko talking about the casualty reports. And trying to remember to read all the names and not being able to read all the names and all that stuff. But the episode itself seems to say it doesn't matter whether you read the names or not, because they're going to die and people are going to die because it's war and it's not fair. And the good people don't get a free pass, and the bad people, it's just, it is what it is. And so the fact that, yes, it was important again to show that command is tough, being in command and not really having the power of life and death over people.
Right.
You can't save people necessarily or stop people from being killed. But the fact is once you're in combat, all that goes out the window, and people are going to live and people are going to die, and you can't figure out who or why it happens one way and not the other way. So I thought that was cool. The cycle of it'll just keep repeating itself endlessly as long as the war lasts. And so what? So what? What can you do about it? Nothing.
Well, you created a nice dichotomy with Sisko there, which is the kind of the two ends of the spectrum. One is he wants to remember every name. You want to humanize. You want to realize that when you're declaring war or when you're sending people on a mission, it's not just 100 casualties versus 200. Okay, that's worth it. Or it's not just a numbers game. They're actual people and human lives, and you bring this real humanity to it through all those stories there. But then the other side of that is in the same episode, Sisko turns into a kill or be killed captain because he's forced to. When he's in it, he's and they're saying, well, isn't that going to kill a lot of Jem'Hadar? Or we thought that they were such savages when they used these mines, but now we're the ones using them. And Sisko doesn't flinch because it's when you're in it, it's dog eat dog, it's kill or be killed. And so he showed us both ends of that spectrum, and it was beautifully convincing for both. Absolutely. Just the idea of trying to remember all the names. But the fact is, when he needed to send Nog out there, it didn't matter if it was his son's friend or Quark's nephew or whatever. It's like, he's in the uniform, man. You're going to do the job, and either you'll get back or you won't get back, or parts of you will get back. So yeah, I mean, all of that. I do think, in the scheme of the series and the franchise, I do think it raises questions for an audience that most of those episodes don't raise or make as difficult to answer. So in that sense, I think the show achieved. I want to just take a second and give a shout out to Win Colby, because Win was a director we used a lot.
I like when we didn't have the same kind of relationship I had with like Alan Craker maybe, but he was a solid director, and he was a Vietnam vet. So he really got this episode. Yeah, he really got this episode. And I felt really comfortable with him directing. And he was very, 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 he was always a serious guy, but he was very serious about this episode. And so that took a level of concern that I might have had away. And I was happy to have him on set. And I think he did
fantastic job.
Yeah.
There was a moment when I'm watching and I felt like an old Western, when they're like, they got to come through this way here and we're going to make them into the ravine, this is the only way to come get to us.
And they're just waiting.
And they're just waiting down there. And I love that. A little space Western moment for me. But the thing I really like is the moment that you wrote with Worf and Sisko. And it goes along the line of what you were saying, but Worf says it was a great victory. The people will talk about it for generations.
Yeah. It's story and song.
Yes. And it reminds me, almost like how we talk about D-Day or all of these other kinds of, things that are just like, these big moments in historical wars. And even though we win or, the good guys win, it's still that loss that you have to always kind of remember the people that sacrificed in those moments. And I felt like you really summed that, there's the glory of winning, but there's also the sadness of the sacrifice that it takes. And I felt like this episode really encompassed a lot of that in that scene with Worf and Sisko at the end, where he says it costs a lot, talking about, what the costs of war are, what the costs of victory are, which are often kind of, it goes unnoticed a lot. We just always say, oh, we have to beat the Russians, or we have to beat these guys, beat that guy. But there's a cost involved with it. And usually that means people are dying.
Well, yeah. And also the people who don't die, the cost to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No one is unchanged, by those kind of big events having to live through, I mean, the moments, in my life, the few times, forget, kid violence where you're having fights with your friends or you get into a punch up or whatever the hell it is. But I can remember every like Jeopardy moment in my life, and luckily nothing, happened, but they stick with me. I can remember a gun pulled on me or a knife pulled on me or whatever. And how, when I was living in growing up in the apartment building I grew up with, there was a lobby, which at one point had been very nice, kind of Art Deco. And then it became less nice as things changed. And I remember as a kid, I must have been like 11. And I came out to go see my friends, and standing in the lobby of my building was this guy, this grown-up man. And I forget what we were talking about, but he was weird. And I don't know exactly what he wanted from me. But at one point he opened up his coat and he had a gun, and he had his hand on the gun. And just then there were two wings to the building, and the one wing, they both had elevators, and the elevator doors opened, and a couple came out, and he took his hand away and dropped the coat over his waist, and I just went right out of the building. I didn't wait to see what happened with I just got out of there. And this happened many, 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 many years ago. But I remember for months after, when I went outside, every time I went in that lobby, I was like freaked out. That lobby was no longer a safe place. Mm-hmm. It took me a long time as a kid to feel comfortable just going out of my building, you know. And I'm just trying to, I mean, that's minor compared to what we're talking about. But imagine, that's what we were trying to say in the show. I mean, you know, what is Ezri taking away from knowing Kellen and having Kellen die in her arms? Mm-hmm. You know, we got to play some of it with Nog, thankfully, you know, but what did Sisko really think about? What would have happened if Nog hadn't made it? What would he have said to Jake? You know, all that kind of stuff. You know, what happened to Reese? Did Reese survive the Dominion War? What the hell is Reese doing in the 24th century? How is he living in the so-called perfect, you know, federation where everyone is mentally stable and there's no problem. Everyone's a saint in paradise. These are things that I hope people come away from the episode, you know, thinking about. But most of all, when they hear about, you know, whether it's what's happening in the Ukraine now, that stuff is painful. And the idea about, you know, waving the flag means, you know, what it means, and being a patriot means this, that, the other thing. You better think about it. You know, sometimes you got to fight wars, but when you do, you better be prepared for what that is, what's going to happen, you know?
Yeah. All right. And you, I think you very, very successfully illustrated that in this episode. You really humanified it, if that's a word. You made it.
It is now.
Humanized it. Let's use real words. Might as well.
Sounds like a healthcare plan. Do you have humanified?
We do have to take our break and hop over to the free-for-all in just a second here. And we'd love to give a very special thanks to Commander Homer Frizzell out in Walter Koenig's former apartment building in New York, Dr. Marie Segal, currently still in New York, Eve England out in Wales, Yvette Blackmon-Tom, who is a veteran herself, Carmen, a.k.a. Skillet, Tim Baum, a.k.a. Grandpa One. I think he's going to join us on the other side. He's also a veteran. TJ Jackson-Bey out in Missouri, Bill Victor Arucan. Titus Mohler, Darlena Marie, John Mann, Dr. Mohamed Noor, Tierney C. Diekman, Anna Post, Rex A. Wood, Anil O. Erika Stroem, Joe Balsarati, Mike Gu, Faith Howell, DQ, Neal Akasaka, Justine Norton-Kertson, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, and of course, Dr. Susan V. Gruner. Everybody, we will be right back with the free-for-all. Ira is an amazing human and will be sticking around for the free-for-all, so we'll see you on the other side. Until then, always remember the seventh rule. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the seventh rule with Cirroc, Lofton, and Ira Stephen Behr. This has been a great and fun conversation. Malissa and I are having a blast. I hope they are as well. We are joined by Anil O. We've got Grandpa One out in the Mojave somewhere, Carrie Schwent, Tierney C. Diekman, Goldu Scott Jensen, our audio engineer. Check out our audio podcast. He's remastering all of it, and it sounds glorious. Rex A. Wood is also here. Eve England out in Wales. Faith Howell is here with, there he is, Thomas. And Titus Mohler, also the return of Titus, finally.
Yes.
So we're talking about this really powerful and poignant and memorable episode. Let's start with you, Tim Baum, aka Grandpa One. You did send us a message saying you're going to save up some energy specifically for this episode. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
Actually, my background there is the view out of my forward operating base Frizzell, where I was stationed in Afghanistan. And actually on the other side of those mountains is Iran. No, because I was on a very small fob, similar to what these guys were in this episode. I did write down a bunch of notes, but brain fog. Hopefully, I'm having trouble reading my writing. One of my it caught me at first, and I don't think I ever caught it when I first watched it, is Vic's mention of wanting to be in the USO. And it's like, wow, they really did program that character with the period. I kind of wish Bashir had gone, what's a USO? Let's see. And then, okay, one of the first scenes was friendly fire, which unfortunately happens way too often. It was very realistic in that they recognized each other's weapons as far as the sound of them and realized they were shooting at each other.
Yeah.
Their frustration is they should have been rotated out after 3 months. There's like, we don't need supplies. We need to get the hell out of here. Okay, I'll skip to this. One of the best scenes was the interaction between Vargas and Bashir when they first had the bandage. And one of the things I try to describe is like, in the military, we call each other brothers and sisters. Yeah. And we love our brothers and sisters, both lay down our life for them, but we don't necessarily like them. I don't know if that, I'll go to war with you, but I'll be damned if I get a beer with you, because I just really can't stand you. And so I thought that was done very well, where Bashir was kind of like confused as, I thought you hated him. I do. But why do you want to keep the bandage? It's because, well, that was the last thing he did. And I thought that was one of the more powerful scenes. And then the whole thing about anticipating the attack. I always say, the only thing worse than going to the dentist is thinking about going to the dentist. And
yes.
So you're just there. Let's just get this damn thing over with. Right when they were waiting for the attack, I forget which character was clicking the site back and forth. And it's like, please stop. It's like, sorry. I'm a little, and obviously Nog's sacrifice when he was wounded, he was apologizing because, he thought he got somebody killed, and, they're saying, dude, you did okay. You actually saved us. Cork's reaction, I thought, was very well done, because you never think of him as very paternalistic. And so just out of his own anger, he tore into Sisko and said, he's going to lose his leg because of you. Which that's a side of Cork we really had never seen. And then and probably my favorites, I'll skip ahead because I'm getting a little brain fog. I thought the final scene with the battle was very well, incredibly emotional in the use of "I'll Be Seeing You," which is one of my favorite songs anyway, juxtaposed with the attack going on. Nog's laying there not knowing he can't do anything. He has to listen to the battle, but in the background you just hear the "I'll be seeing you." And then also with, we held, our orders were to hold, but it cost enough. I forget. So I kind of tried to write it down. We have to remember, like I said, I did these the other day and I was kind of out of it, still out of it. But, if anybody wants to ask me a question real quick before I go lay down back in bed.
Well, we appreciate you jumping in, even though you're feeling very ill. But I did want to ask you, actually, I don't know if anybody else does, when you watched this the first time, a lot of people say, for various episodes, they kind of feel seen or they kind of feel understood. Did this, the first time or even the most recent time, did you feel like these people are kind of representing us, or this episode is bringing to light some of the things that we go through that most people don't know about, or any kind of realizations like that?
Oh, it definitely was. I honestly did not see this episode until probably 2013 or 14.
Wow.
Like I'd mentioned before, I watched the show when it was first on, but we moved around, and that was before TV online guides. So you didn't know when you moved to a different city, and Star Trek was on a different day, different time, different station. So I kind of lost track in the last few years. And so I watched this after I got back, and it was very powerful. Brought back memories. Like I said, one of the scene that struck me is trying to describe how, he was very emotional about losing the doc, but he still hated the guy. And, when he said, just like, the guy would never shut up, and finally he shut up, and that's because he was killed. It's the first time he's quiet in his whole life. That was the one scene that really, and the anticipation, you have raw intel saying that somebody's planning an attack on you. But that's all you know. It's like, well, they just do it and get it over with. Fortunately for me, there was never an attack on the base. There was intel that said there was going to be, but we managed to get out of there before we had an attack on the base. And so that it was a very powerful episode for me for that. And like I said, I don't know if I said it clearly enough, but the Quark's suddenly becoming a father figure, and the anger he felt, it's like, and I don't know in what context I wrote this down, but I said no heroes. Something I was going to bring up in Paper Moon. It's like, I've been called, people called me a hero because I served in Afghanistan. It's like, I happen to be good at a job that provided for my family. I'm not a hero. It just so happened to be, this is not necessarily my chosen career field, but when I was good enough to provide for a wife and 2 kids, it just happened to take me to some nasty places. And so, I got, one of my collateral duties was as part of the ceremonial unit that did military funerals. And so I always said, I'm not a hero, but I've carried a few. I did try to have a whole bunch of notes, but like I watched these when I was in the grasp of Corona. So, triple vaccinated, made it 2.5 years, and all of a sudden,
got me a few weeks ago too. It's gonna get everybody. Wow.
But no, that I thought it was a powerful episode just because I could identify with it. It's just, this. A lot of times we used to refer to it as Groundhog Day because they mentioned it in there as kind of the boredom just drives you crazy. Your orders are to protect this, and it's just like every day is the same thing.
Well, Tim, if you do need to leave and go back and rest and take care of yourself, feel free at any point. But we really appreciate you joining in and taking a few minutes to give us your thoughts on this, especially.
You're welcome.
Anil, how you doing? Or where are you today? Are you in Colorado, Turkey, South America?
No, I'm in the US now. So I'm in Virginia for a few weeks. This episode is really powerful. I just watched it, and it still hits every time because it makes you think of all the wars that are happening all over the place, right? And we hear about like these big battles where, they kind of like last week we were talking about, they become legendary, and then you have these sort of stories of these great battles, and but there are all these little battles, right? And there are all these skirmishes where people are being killed, and it's kind of like what Sisko says at the end, like I really hope this was worth it. And he doesn't know, right? Like he can't justify that to Nog. And what Quark says, which I think is one of the best lines of the whole series, when he says, people are really good when their bellies are full, they've got their sleep, they're comfortable. And he said, you start taking those things away, and it's we're a pretty dangerous species. And I think we kind of start to see Nog go from that innocence of the the Federation and how he views it, and now he's really seeing a different side of humanity that I don't think he's ever seen. And it's unfortunately, he's gonna it's gonna take him down, as we know, a pretty rough road for a while. So
yeah.
But yeah, the music was great too. Also, the music was really fantastic. It was different. It was just a really unsettling music. And the last thing I'll say, what I really like about the Jem'Hadar is that they never get less scary or threatening. Like they're just always intimidating. So like the Borg, for example, you see them enough, they kind of, you see a human side and they soften up a little bit, as the movies and the series go on. But the Jem'Hadar never do that. Like they don't care. They're just killing machines. Like they don't have any other purpose. So great episode.
Awesome.
And Ira was talking a little bit about this before we started, and you just mentioned it, Neal, when you were talking about Quark's line is, "This isn't the Starfleet you know." He tells that to Nog, like, "Oh, you've been in a protected bubble. You haven't experienced this version of this side of humanity or the Federation, or this level of desperateness and kind of drastic situation." I love the way you threw that line in there, Ira. "This isn't the Starfleet you know." It kind of in alignment with what you were saying about challenging the ideal of what Starfleet is about. I think you did that too as well.
Well, yeah, you just weren't, it all takes place on beautiful, cool-looking starships, and every now and then the actors go like this, or they go like this, and, there's a couple of pops of fire suddenly erupts on a panel, and someone goes over a railing, and that's combat, but that's not combat. And all those other ships blowing up, hundreds of people are being killed, and the audience doesn't care, as long as it's a good explosion, wow. So yeah, this was a chance to get a little blood on the audience, little blood splatter on their clothes, maybe.
Yeah. That line actually made me think of humans turn into such monsters. I mean, we even invented a word for when we get so annoyed when we're just a tiny bit hungry. We created the word hangry. I mean, that's a real thing. Or you think we're so dignified and classy and nice, but let's see how we act when our Wi-Fi sucks, right? We turn into monsters. Eve England, who has never been a monster or shown any frustration ever, by the way. Any thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I watched it again today, and it's just such a wow episode, isn't it? I mean, there's just so many things that I love about this, and I'll just pick up on a few because I know that there's just so much for us all to talk about. I mean, I think just as a general observation, I just love how it's both epic and poignant at the same time, and how, we have, as we've just mentioned, how we have different aspects of war questioned or rationalized through the different character perspectives as we kind of go through. And just coming back to that point about the war, actually, that we literally just mentioned, is I was reading the companion, and it says about how the writers and how you each took different perspectives or different influences from different sort of 20th century warfare in terms of picking out and some of the things to really highlight here, and actually just really to make sure that what the episode really does is to present war, as it is, brutal, tragic, often futile, and to make it actually much more personal, as you said, it's more relatable to us. We're just not used to watching Star Trek to actually seeing the true human cost of war. Though we've had a couple of snippets of that of some of the episodes, as Cirroc's episode, and I think Rocks and Shoals as well. I mean, for me, my favorite line the set of lines is really the dialogue where Reese observes when they've got the replacements coming in, and he's just saying, children. And then how Sisko just comes back and says, not for long, or not for long. And it that to me just really captured that horror of how, and all those faces that you used to see from the Second World War, or even now in Ukraine, and you see all these sort of 17, 18-year-olds going off to war, and it's just truly awful, and what actually happens to them. And then for me, in terms of pulling the whole thing together, it's really, as we just mentioned about the music, that to me, that where we have that sort of that haunting music overlay for that battle scene at the end, and I immediately had sort of parallels to the platoon death scene, because it just had you've got all that horror and all that grotesqueness going on in the background, but then this beautiful music being played really kind of just sort of brings it all together and gives the episode that sort of extra gravitas that we all have come to expect from Deep Space Nine. So Ira and the rest of the crew, the actors, everyone, it's just I don't think I remembered how much of a wow factor episode it was, because I don't think I've seen it that many times. So yeah, I was just really impressed with all of the things coming together. It's just, there was nothing I would have picked up on to that takes away from that impact.
By the way, Ira, did you notice Eve England's earrings are cloaked defiance? Let me check. Wait, hang on. There it is. Isn't that great?
Cool. Very cool. Very nice.
Okay.
Going in and out of the wormhole.
Yeah. Let's see. Carrie Schwent, how are you? Looks like you have a Star Trek The Cruise thing in the background.
I got a couple
Yoga
posters.
mat.
I got my little Starfleet Behr, and I'm looking for suggestions for a name for him. I haven't decided yet. And I also have my haiku for the week.
Okay.
Or for this week's episode. I'm going to do this every week now. Outpost under siege. Nog uses the 7th rule. They are not just names.
Right, because he kept his ears open. That was a good one. Yeah.
As soon as he heard that, I've watched way too many CinemaSins videos. So when he heard that, I heard in my head, roll credits.
So how'd you feel about this episode overall?
So good. Full of so many, what I like to call, and this is a term I got from an Outlander podcast, Ira, full of many, many tear prick moments where you're just, that feeling where you are kind of starting to cry, but the tears haven't started flowing yet, kind of thing. It's many tear prick moments for sure. Just so good overall. And I have in general, Star Trek nitpick, and this applies to every single Star Trek series ever. When somebody says, so many, three to beam up, which 3? Especially if you're in a crowd of people, how do they know which 3 to beam up?
I actually thought of that when I saw that. And I thought maybe it has to do with the proximity to the person who's communicating. I was like, well, it has to be, you have to stand close to me. I thought of the same thing. It was very brief, but I thought of the same thing. How did anyone know which 3?
Yeah, every single episode, every time something like that comes up, I immediately say to the screen, how many? Which ones?
Yeah.
Well,
oh,
that's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
But then sometimes they take off their badge and they put it on somebody else and they go like on my signal or whatever. But yeah, it's one of those plot things that just kind of ships move at the speed of plot. Tierney C. Diekman.
Singing at the beginning, just
sorry,
the lady is a scamp.
The what? I'm sorry.
The lady is a scamp.
Oh yeah.
Oh, so good.
Oh, yeah. That's we forgot to talk about that, Ira. Like, there's a little mini joke right there. That was good, kid, but it's a tramp. Lady's a tramp. I like that.
So cute.
All right. That is not an intro for Tierney. She's never been a scamp. She's an angel. She's got a great shirt on. Any thoughts on this? She's like, I'm not an angel, dude. I just saw your eyebrows. Any thoughts on this episode?
Oh, this episode, wow. So a little very out of character for me when it comes to rewatching these for seventh rule. I came up blank for notes, just based on emotion. Every time I thought about it, on what to pinpoint, what stood out the most to me, I couldn't just pick it. I couldn't. And Jim and I both, we sat down and watched this together, and as many know and remember or don't know, he's military, active duty in the Navy. He's gone on, I don't know, 4 or 5 deployments now. And we both finished this in tears. I mean, admittedly, just in tears for a number of reasons. And it's why I keep thinking about what can I put down for this? What can I bring to the table about this that sets it apart from maybe others' opinions or anything, or agreeable opinions? And I just can't bring up those things because I just keep getting those feelings that it brings forth. It is, I can see why some people at the time, even now, think, this isn't Star Trek. This is another one of those very human, very relatable. This is definitely, at least to me, very Star Trek episodes because of that. Mm-hmm. And this is seeing beloved characters, and it doesn't matter that they're characters. You love them. You feel connected to them. You relate to them at this point. DS9 has the incredible character development that they are part of our lives. Look at us here. And they're going through hell needlessly for a relay station that we don't even know is worth it. And there is no, slow, happy ending to their deaths. There's no, quiet goodbye. There's Kellen's just down, Fargus it's just, they're just gone, because that's the reality of it when these things actually happen. And they need to be known in general life for a lot of people that are sheltered from this. And it's not, I think, everybody needs to know the horrors of war, but there are some that just don't get it. And unfortunately, a lot of these are the people that are making the decisions of why these things happen, why war goes ahead, of course. And you have kind of a perfect episode to portray this. I skip this episode sometimes, and not because I don't like it. I love it, but because sometimes I am not prepared to feel that much. I'm not. And the score, that is one thing I have written down, because, and Yvette said it, it's that Platoon-esque, opus for strings, that you in the gut and the heart. And there are just so many things. Like I said, I'm at a loss for this one. I have just about nothing written down, because this is completely emotional for me. For Jim, we just sat there for a good 5 minutes, like just silent tears, like, oh God, this is just this connects too much to what we felt over 10 years of not knowing what we're going to deal with. I mean, the first deployments with him over there, I didn't know what he was going through. I didn't know what he was going to have to deal with. And neither did he. And like Tim had said, he was lucky they didn't attack the base. I mean, I can't imagine. And more everyday people can't imagine. And this is so freaking real. It's amazing writing. It's incredible. But moving on from that, I'm sure I'll think of plenty of things that I could have talked about in specifics as soon as we're done with this. But I did have a question for Ira. There are some notes I've seen that this caused more backstage controversy, and there isn't much to allude to what that might have been. Can you shine any light on that if you remember, or if you feel comfortable doing so, or has that kind of been kept in the background quiet for good reasons?
Well, outside of the usual, is there any validity in doing any of this at all? In terms of the Dominion War, that was always a, hanging over like a cloud, like, you guys better know what the hell you're doing, because this isn't, business as usual. I mean, the biggest, dust up that we had on this episode, and one that I talked about previously today, which sticks with me, is, the original idea was to blow off both the Nog's legs. That was what we wanted to do, because that was horrific. That was really horrific and would have been so disturbing in a Star Trek, because we knew he was going to get his legs back. It's the 24th century. So the audience is immediately saying, oh, he'll be okay. If he's not dead, Bashir will bring him back. And, so what in the moment can be the thing that grips the audience in a way that they can't, slither out of, such as a strong grip. So it was blowing off both his legs, make him half a human being, and Rick just refused. And it was the kind of thinking, that drove me nuts at the time. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's like, what the hell are you guys doing? That's the whole point. Let's make the audience uncomfortable. Let's not be afraid of making the audience uncomfortable. It's the 7th season, for God's sake. We don't have to worry about a pickup. We don't have to worry about people liking us. Not that. But just in terms of what would hit, in the gut the most. And it's one of those battles that I lost, and he just, it seemed like I never believed in the validity of the battle. I never believed that we should have to fight those battles, but indeed we did. So that was the backstage thing that lasted throughout the writing of the episode and the pre-production of the episode. That's the only thing I can think of. I don't know if there were any cast problems. I don't recall. I mean, Renee was only in one scene, so he and Avery, I'm sure, got along okay for that scene. And that's all I can remember.
Thank you. That makes a lot more sense too, for the originally considering taking both legs. Is in some ways it almost seemed, when I first thought of it, a wee bit, and I apologize, a wee bit comical to just have both of his legs gone. But I can see where that would make more sense of that punch in the gut. And that was one thing that my husband and I had said, they could have made this so much worse. They could have just done the same thing of the quick kill that had been done with the other characters with someone we know and love, and hit us that hard with, that is the reality of war, just like this episode is showing what's actually happening when those ships are blowing up, when the ground troops are going down, like with what Jake, saw on the ground, and what happened to Munez, and it's that makes more sense of why the 2 legs. And yeah, you're right, it's Star Trek. He would have gotten his legs back, but
no.
Wow.
Well, speaking of characters we know and love, Rex A. Wood is here, who started Trekkers Against Bullying. We want to thank you for joining us today, because you can obviously provide some insights about this show and this episode in specific. How are you today, Rex?
I'm doing okay. This is a hard episode for me.
Yeah.
First of all, with Aron, one of his best ones, but the whole ideal of losing your legs. I know most of you know that I'm a double amputee, and I lost mine in a different kind of service, being on the fire department. But I can tell you that this one definitely hits home. I mean, it starts out with, and I'm going to try to cover some of it before I cover Nog's part of it, but with Sisko counting the dead. Okay. I mean, that's really difficult when you're looking at a list of people and where you're at there of who didn't make it. Reminds me of many times on fire department runs and having a tragedy happen and having to look at the list of the people that just didn't make it. To the point that we also have the effort when we talk about the mines with the Jemadar, that we talk about how they're a great thing till we turn them around on them and really think about it and think about, now we're going to use these things that we think are really great, and we're going to turn them around and actually use them on somebody else, and how horrific that these mines are. There's that quick thought about that in there about, are we doing the right thing? I really felt like they were all kind of like, should we do this or not? And then, of course, down to when Nog actually gets his leg taken. The real episodes coming up that will really get me hard. Paper Moon is coming up, talking about a lot with PTSD and things like that. But just when Nog is laying there in the bed and he's saying it doesn't hurt. Okay. It doesn't hurt. You think it would, but it doesn't hurt. And he's starting to realize, what's going on and that his life is going to change. And it does. It does when you lose a limb. But at the same time, as we see later, that comes out better at that point. So this episode is just, it hits so home. Like I said, Aron just gets the acting perfect in this. He just does. He this is one that if we could give it, he should have gotten an award for. There's a couple episodes here that he should have just gotten an award for. And this is one of them, because it does bring back things that happened to me, knowing that I'm going to lose my legs. The double leg thing, Ira, I hadn't heard that, but I could see how that would have been. I think it would have been just fine. I mean, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. I know it would have been a little horrific, but at that point, I think it would have been, I wouldn't have had any problem with it. I think showing the casualties of war and things that happen like that, and just stuff that happens in everyday's life. But yeah, this is, like I said, it's hard for me to really talk about having to go through this myself and know where it puts you in your life, where you do start to become that, as Ira said, and I know Ira didn't say it with any insult or anything, but you become that half human, that half body. You start thinking about that, that you're now not good enough anymore. And so it was really good. Like I said, it brings a lot out as we move into the rest of the story plot with Nog. That's where it really comes out more. And so when Paper Moon comes around, expect a lot more tears on Paper Moon, because that one, and as you can see in the back, is my Paper Moon picture of Nog back behind.
Rex, I have a question for you about your experience.
Yes.
Was the biggest difficulty for you emotionally, let's say, Was it the initial moments in which you're seeing that you're now altered, or did it come later as you started to realize your life was changing? I mean, did it happen instantly, or did it kind of, the way you felt about it change gradually?
There's a little bit of denial with it. Okay, first of all, when things like this happen, you can still feel things. Okay, you still feel like your leg is there.
The phantom feelings.
The phantom pains, the phantom feelings that you get, absolutely. So there's a lot of denial to begin with it, that this has actually happened. My realization came finally probably about 2 or 3 days later. And I'm sitting in the in the hospital room, and you start looking down. Okay. For a while, I didn't even want to look down. You ignore it. You ignore it. They come in, they clean your dressings. You try to ignore that something's gone from your body, something that had been with you for many, many years. But it all comes later. It really does. I think if you talk to most amputees, it comes down the road. When the denial stops, when you start having to look at getting prosthetics. My biggest worry was I going to be able to have prosthetics? Some people are not able to, and that was my biggest worry. I've been really lucky to where it took them off at the knee, below the knee, which has allowed me to still do a lot of my natural life. But I can tell you that it came 3 or 4 days later, and by myself, just sitting in a room and realizing that my life was going to change. Yes, I put my pants on differently than the rest of you. I get to pull my legs out and put them through. But I've also learned the good in it too. Like I said, I can still do everything that I could do before. I wasn't much of a swimmer, so if I wanted to swim, I could. But I pretty much can still do it. It was coming out with a better attitude. But that took a while. That really did. But yeah, definitely Cirroc. It's something that happens later too. You just like when somebody dies, you're in that denial. Okay, that they're gone. They're gone. It's the same thing, and that's exactly what was going on with me. So absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. One other really, really quick question. Sorry, I have
no,
to
it's
know
okay
this because it's important for me to know. The feeling that Nog felt in this scene where he tells Sisko, it doesn't hurt as much. You'd think it hurt, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself having to cheer up other people because you saw how they were reacting to you? Yes,
absolutely. Because there were people that thought, you could tell that they thought that your life was, that they were thinking that your life has changed so much. Okay.
Right.
And having to tell them, hey, it'll be okay. I don't know how many times I said that. It'll be okay to them, and settled them down. I know that we're lucky enough with all these prosthetic advancements that if it had happened 20, 30 years ago, it wouldn't have been as easy on me. These new advancements have actually done a lot. So yeah, there were people that I really you're right. I had to cheer them up, and I don't even really think about it. But now that you said that, absolutely. There were friends and family members and everybody that was like, my wife actually was worried about me because I'm a very type A personality. And she was worried about me getting out and doing things. She goes, if you're not careful, you're going to kill yourself because you're going to be sitting at home all worried and not being able to work and all these kind of things. But I went back to work. I did things. And that was the motivation, was to get out. If I had sat at home, yeah, there probably would have been a good chance that mentally wise, something could have happened. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Not to bring everybody down and be a bummer.
Not at all. Thank you for joining us today and sharing this. Absolutely. Really appreciate
I will say that where with this episode, the big off-screen battle was about the extent of Nog's injuries. It's only a paper moon. The biggest argument behind the scenes was, can we do an episode that just features Aron Eisenberg and Jimmy Darren, without having their regular cast there? and that became the thing. And I have to say, it was a lot easier to convince the powers that be that we can do an episode, that Aron and Jimmy could carry an episode, and no one's going to be sitting there thinking, you know, gee, I'm watching an episode and it's people who are not in the first 9 of the cast.
We're the stars of the show. We're the first the regular cast members.
What show am I watching? I don't get it. That was a lot easier to convince them than how badly injured Nog could be. So there you go.
The answer there was a resounding yes, definitely.
Mhm.
Speaking of a resounding yes, that's the best I got. Goldu Scott, how are you today? Thanks for joining in.
Resoundingly nice. Yes. I had a lot to say about this one again, and reiterating what other people had said too. But the most interesting thing that I think that I found about this, particularly in this watch through, was who we saw this incredibly human story through and who we didn't see it through.
Yeah.
I think it was very important that Kira was on the station. It was very important that Worf was on the Defiant, and that these, people that were so incredibly versed with that kind of situation weren't there. We had Sisko there, and he's been through a lot of that stuff as well too. And also another point was that we saw through the 3 main people we saw this through on the ground, I felt like, was Nog, Quark, and Ezri, and 3 non-human characters also. Seeing all of this go down. Ezri was very interesting because you know how Jadzia would have handled all of that, of course. Would have been fun. Curzon would have handled that, with his eyes shut, and that kind of, and her having that uncertainty. And then I very much related with Quark, coming from the standpoint of being an uncle and loving that kid. And, no matter how much he would never admit that he loves Nog like a son that he's never going to have. And to see Nog going through the situation so bright-eyed and wide open and running directly into it was definitely the 3 factors of the 3 of those characters I thought was incredibly interesting to see the 3 of them in that particular perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was
those unbelievable points. I wonder if Quark really takes to Nog because he, like you said, he knows he's never going to have a kid. That's really good observation, I think. Titus Mohler, how are you? Welcome back. Any thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I certainly dovetail off of what some of the previous comments. I think that Quark's speech about humans to Nog really kind of stood out with me. Deep Space Nine always struck me as a show, as a Star Trek show, more than any of the others that questioned just how much humanity has evolved. I'm thinking about, I think Hard Time with O'Brien at the end there. He's questioning that, and I think Quark, yeah, and I think Quark, just definitely makes a really compelling case about that with his speech about humans. And then I was struck by Nog's response to that speech, because I think, of course, Quark makes a really compelling case. And then he said, aren't you going to say something? And Nog says, I feel sorry for the Jem'Hadar. And it just makes me think, like, man, what a warrior Nog is, But also, I'm also struck too that Quark just gave this speech about humans. Nog hadn't seemed to think too much of them maybe early in the series, and yet now he has got their back to an extraordinary degree, even after this damning speech.
Yeah.
So I thought that showed a lot of loyalty there and a lot of just development in that character. And seeing Nog without one of his legs, that to me was huge. I just thought, I really felt like the writers on the show were just kind of taking the stakes and raising them significantly, because I just remember thinking, Star Trek characters, main and even recurring characters, they don't lose limbs. It just isn't something that that really happens. And I remember thinking, this is huge, you know. And I think, of course, you know, the fact that you have the technology to you know, add the prosthetic there, and that makes perfect sense for 24th century abilities. But I still thought that was really impactful. And then somebody else mentioned too the phrase, one of the characters, I think Reese said, you know, children when the replacements come, and Sisko, you know, says not for long. And I think I remember reading once that the late great Michael Pillar wanted the war to be ended sooner on the show, and not to contradict him, but I think this episode is a great argument for telling a war story for as long as the show did, because Sisko, I think, really earns the authority with the audience to say that line, not for long, because we've seen him in action repeatedly. I mean, he's served quite a bit in this war, and is, you know, far from just, you know, a general who kind of swoops in here and there and offers strategy and everything. So I think, you know, that was a weighty line from him, and it was well earned. And then it's a continuing honor to be on these Zoom calls with all of you, and it's a big first-time honor to be on the call with you, Ira. And I just wanted to ask you, I feel like you've gotten some of the highest compliments a writer can probably get on this call from Tim, from Rex, just kind of validating firsthand that you really nailed it, that the writing staff really nailed some of these things is very authentic. And I was just wondering if you have veterans on the writing staff or consultants or just really good research that helped bring that authenticity.
Well, you know, I've, you know, read extensively about a lot of things, history especially. So I've read a lot of firsthand accounts. David Weddell's father had a lot of experience in the military. Ron is, you know, another kind of geek where it comes to that in terms of, you know, reading a lot. You know, I have to say, you know, and I alluded to this in our last conversation before you guys jumped on. I mean, you know, I wound up living in what seemed to be a bit of a war zone. You know, I had a very unique, not unique, but I had one of those experiences where, you know, I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood that by the time I was 12 or 13, you know, became a crime-ridden neighborhood. And just that what I know just off of that, the danger and the feeling and what people I know had been through, you know, people who I knew who had been murdered, you know, I mean, it got crazy there, unfortunately, which is what poverty and drugs will bring to you, unfortunately. So, you know, and it's the human condition. And I hope as a writer, we're able to understand, or at least in some way be able to present the human condition in all its glory and in all its horror. You know, that's the job basically. And, you know, Deep Space Nine was an opportunity that I certainly didn't feel when I was on TNG to explore some of those things. So, you know, and if, you know, you just have to be ballsy enough to think, well, if we get some stuff wrong, maybe it's okay because it's for a greater good, and the basic concepts, you know, have a truth to them that go beyond whether or not this would be exactly the way, you know, the platoon would, you know, would be, it's funny you bring this up because when I was watching it yesterday for the first time in 20 odd years, when the Jemadar had sent out the full platoon for them so that they could figure out the firepower of the Federation people, it's like, and where the field of fire. I thought what we should have done is then we should have moved them around to kind of screw that up, do something in response to it. And we don't really do that. It's like, okay, now they know where we are, how many there are of us, but we don't do a countermeasure. Yeah, that might have been clever. That could have been a good Sisko moment or a Reese moment where they pull that shit out. But this is what happens after 25 years. You get these insights. It's only a quarter of a century late, but now we have them, boy. If I do this episode again, in the reboot of Deep Space Nine, I'll get that scene right. God damn it.
Okay. And Faith Howell, who's got Deep Space Nine in her background, how are you? Have you seen this episode recently, and how much did you love it?
I'm gonna be honest, this is one of the ones that I skipped because as much as I love it, it hurts too much. Yeah. And so I really hate that you hurt Nog. But at the same time, I do want to say thank you, Ira, for telling this story because it leads into Paper Moon and all of that growth. And that particular arc has meant a lot to me. I know a lot of you guys have military experience or other things, but there are a lot of things that can happen to a person that cause PTSD. And I guess I'm an outlier in that respect, but this arc for Nog in my more recent life has given me words and ways to feel seen and articulate what I was feeling and going through at the time. And sorry, I've been trying to keep it together, but I've been really thankful for this set of episodes, especially. So I'm glad you're here and I got to say that to you personally.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And, I have to say, I never would have imagined, but there's a lot of things you just can't foresee, that one of the big gifts, I guess, of the 7 years of Deep Space Nine that seems to resonate with the audience is the story of Nog. I mean, don't get me wrong, we've talked about this many times. We all like writing for Nog and for Aron, and we got what that was within the show, and we tried as best as with Jake to include storylines or parts of storylines that showed the growth of the character. But if you had said to me that in the 21st century, well into the 21st century now, I would be talking about, that character as much as we do. And yes, I understand there's other elements involved in Aron's passing, but even before that, it's like, it just goes to show you when you're throwing everything you can at a show, every character, and so many things you're juggling, and trying to paint portraits of so many different characters, then ultimately it's out of your hands, and it's the audience who's going to take away what they take away. They'll tell you.
Tell everybody that argued with you about telling this story, I told you so, and you've saved lives with this
Totally.
It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing, fascinating, I feel I feel very grateful. It bugs me that he's not here. But that's the way it is. And I keep thinking about the last time we were together, which was at Comic-Con, spent the day together, and we went to the panels and we ate together and we were goofing around and we took a walk. For some reason, we were walking from we spent a lot of time together, and it was a lot of fun. But then you have those regrets that you didn't say, the really wise, really touching moment of, I love you, guy, or you did great, or blah, 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 blah. But that's not how life works. It's like you got to be grateful for the time that you spent together. Anyway, beyond that, it's nuts. And I haven't really sat down with Wolf or Ron, or I had dinner with Ron not too long ago, and I've had lunch with Wolfie. Haven't really discussed this thing about what people take away from the show. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, so glad that we got to talk about Aron a little bit more. That was really cool, because we all love and appreciate him. And I could totally picture you, Ira, when you went, you did great. I could totally picture Aron's head locked too. But we do have to run, everybody. And thank you, all of you, for sharing your stories and your thoughts. Thank you to Eve, Anil, Carrie, Tierney, Malissa, Rex, Skuldu Scott, Titus, Faith, and especially Ira. We really appreciate you taking the time and really giving us so much of your time and energy and thoughts, and a great series, by the way. Thank you for all of that. And for everybody else, Cirroc, Lofton, and I would like to thank you and say, keep watching us, keep hanging out, keep thinking of Aron, and tweet Ira and tell him what a great job he did writing this entire series and this episode. For Aron Eisenberg, myself, Cirroc Lofton, thank you all, and always remember the 7th rule.